Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and many people have been saying that Season 4 is the last chance for Diablo 4. It's make or break, the game is dead if it's a bust. Well, in today's campfire chat, we learned about massive changes that they are making to the game, and completely reworking one of the core foundational aspects of the game, itemization, which includes adding tons of new crafting options, killing all garbage loot and trash affixes, and more. They've also addressed complaints about Endgame, upcoming balance changes, and how we're going to test all these. And they covered a whole lot of stuff that drew a bunch of W's from the community. But first, I want to talk about one of the really interesting parts that they started with, which was game director Joe Shelley actually talking about the identity of Diablo 4. And this is almost addressing criticisms that have been leveled at the game over time of, it seems that D4 doesn't really have an identity, or it's like, what is D4's identity? And he kind of went into how there are different kinds of action RPGs. A lot of games can be technically labeled as an action RPG. Elden Ring is technically an action role-playing game, but it's also a Souls-like. And so he focuses in on Diablo-like action RPGs being system action RPGs, where the systems are a crucial element of the game. The decisions that you're making before and between combat. He talks about systems being the lifeblood, the soul of these system RPGs. And this helps frame this entire campfire chat and why the focus is so much on the systems. Because the moment-to-moment combat in Diablo 4, that's fun. One of the biggest issues with the game over time has been that the systems just haven't been as great to engage with, in particular, itemization. So we learned that the PTR for Season 4 will run for 1 week, April 2nd to 9th. It's a short amount of time, but hey, at least we got it. At least we got a PTR now. We also learned that Season 3 will be extended, and Season 4 therefore delayed. May 14th is when we're going to get both the end of Season 3 and the start of Season 4. And that's because they want the time to be able to implement feedback that we give them from PTR. The PTR, which is the beta test server, only available for now on PC Battle.net. They're looking into the future to see what they can do there. Next week, we're going to have a blog going over all the changes, all the massive balance changes and everything that was spoken about this week. But for now, we're going to give a high-level overview of what we learned. So the three major things that they spoke about were the itemization rework, balance changes, and changes to Endgame, changes and improvements and new additions to Endgame. And with the itemization rework, they had a couple of goals. The first one being quality over quantity. They felt there were too many junk item drops, which is absolutely the case. So there's going to be fewer items dropping, but they want to ensure that when you get an item drop, it's going to be a better item. It's going to be something that's likely to be useful for your build, as opposed to almost guaranteed to be useless, which is the current case. The second goal is that they want the best items to have a journey. So your best in slot items, it's not going to be, oh, I found this, I'm done now. It's, I found this is the start of crafting this into my best in slot item. They want us to have those moments of excitement when an item drops, but then they also want us to be able to invest and grow our item so that it becomes something more personalized and meaningful, and we can feel the progression and the increase in power there. So first off, just outright changes to items. They are reducing that bloat of, 120 different affixes, all those hyperconditional things. They are gutting that. They're ensuring now we have just more relevant and more potent affixes. So you can see in these examples, they're getting rid of things like damage to shadow damage over time affected enemies, right? That kind of stuff is gone. The damage on Tuesday stuff is gone. Also, starting in World Tier 3, you only get Sacred Tier items. You're not going to have non-sacreds. And in World Tier 4, you're only going to have ancestral items, no sacreds, no normals. Again, this is less garbage on screen to have to sift through. Not only are they getting rid of those hyperconditional affixes, they're also ensuring the affixes that you do get will be tuned up, dialed up so that you actually feel them. This is, again, one of my many criticisms with the launch version of the itemization system is, I have this gear that has like a 6%, increase to whatever, and I don't feel a 6%. 6% doesn't feel like anything. Well, now you can see, 23% more damage or 38% more vulnerable damage. These are effects that you can feel. You equip this item and it feels good to have this upgrade immediately. You notice it. On a personal note, I don't think +% damage is a good stat. That's just kind of a nitpick on the side. I think it's a boring stat, and it's like, well, if it's on a weapon, every weapon now needs to have percent damage. Otherwise, how are you gonna balance this, that competing affixes are going to compete with a plus flat percent damage? But whatever. That's something that we can talk about in the future. Overall, big win here, big W for the affix rework. Also, they're reducing the number of affixes that naturally roll on items. However, that's because you can craft additional affixes onto items. But now legendary items are going to drop with 3 affixes, and rares are going to drop with only 2 affixes. This effectively means that rare items are now useless in the endgame. So this is good and bad. It's good because right now in D4, right, the meta is you got to pick up every single yellow item, because a yellow item is going to be a potential base for upgrade into legendary. Now yellow items can never be your best in slots, so at endgame you're basically always going to ignore them. I think that's not good. However, in the context of this change from what we had before, this is a very good change, and also it leaves them open to, in the future, do something more with rare items, with blue items, with white items. Again, for now, positive direction. One of my frustrations with the Diablo 4 itemization system was just how tedious it felt to have to sift through loot, and this immensely helps with that. Now, another massively significant change here is to trading. Now you can pretty much trade everything other than uber uniques and items you've crafted upon. So you can now trade regular uniques, you can trade all legendary items. You simply will not be able to trade items that you've improved via the 2 crafting options we're going to discuss, 2 new crafting systems that they've added to the game to replace the existing blacksmith upgrade system. Additionally, now monsters that are level 95 and above will always only drop item power 925 items, the highest power item bases. So again, we don't have to look through a bunch of garbage to see, oh, well, that's 867, delete immediately. You're basically at a point of the game where no item below 925 matters to you anymore, so why do they drop for you anymore? Great change. They're also reworking gems. They didn't go into full details, but they suggested that gems, they're going to be simplifying the attributes on gems. Again, they're going to be making them more generally applicable. Same thing like what they're doing with affixes. So less hyper-conditional, more generally applicable. They're also going to be making gems have a longer crafting tail. So more of a crafting journey on our gems now. They're reworking all of the crafting materials. Overall, we're going to have fewer crafting materials. They're kind of reducing redundancy there, simplifying things. They're capping the reroll cost of item affixes with enchanting. So no more getting exponentially out of control gold prices. You can now get Forgotten Souls from Whispers. You can even, now elites have this like random chance to jackpot and drop a whole bunch of something or other. And one of that something or other can be Forgotten Souls. So you kill an elite, you know, 1 out of every however many elites that you kill is going to just explode with Forgotten Souls. I love these jackpot moments in general. I think they're so important to ARPGs. I talk about god drops, and this is a form of introducing that. A lot of the exciting moments, for instance, in Diablo 3, oh, you found that goblin, right, a material goblin, and boom, it drops all a little jackpot of crafting mats. Also, unique items can now start dropping earlier in the game. They can start dropping in World Tiers 1 and 2. All uniques can start dropping in World Tier 3. In fact, uber uniques can now start dropping as early as level 55, and they're still going to be at item power 925. Now, to clarify, there's still uber rare drops. No one is guaranteed these. You're not going to go out farming for them in World Tier 3 at level 55, but, you know, in your entire lifetime of playing D4, that one time you find a Shaco at level 56, you're going to be telling that to your grandchildren. Next, Codex of Power rework. Okay, forget how the Codex of Power currently works. It is now turned into an upgrade system. All aspects are now in the codex, and when you salvage a legendary, well, whatever roll was on that legendary, that is now the new minimum roll in your codex. Instead of the codex just always being the lowest roll, now again, instead of having to keep 80 versions of rolls of these aspects in order to ensure you always have the best rolls on your aspects, if you get a max roll, you extract that, boom, your codex now permanently has that max rolled aspect in it. You can imprint infinitely with that max roll. Now, they're making some changes to the rolls on aspects to go along with that. So as you go higher in world tier, the highest maximum roll you can get on an aspect increases. So in world tier 3, you cannot get a fully max rolled aspect. You'll only get that in world tier 4. So it turns it into a progression system. It seems most aspects have 16 ranks from minimum to maximum roll. Some aspects just have one rank to them because they're kind of on or off aspects. But this does so much good to reduce our clutter in our stash. You also know once you get a max roll on an aspect, you extract that, boom, you never need to grab or farm or extract that aspect ever again. All right, now remember how we said that gear's only going to drop with 3 affixes now? That's because of the new crafting options. And one of the new crafting systems, one of the 2 new crafting systems is tempering. Now, normally you can add 1 tempered affix to a piece of gear, but ancestral gear can have 2 tempered affixes. So for a total of 5 affixes, the 3 base plus the 2 tempered affixes that you craft on. What are tempered affixes? How do you get them? Well, you're going to get some recipes dropping. They're called tempering manuals. A tempering manual is going to contain a list of tempered affixes. I don't know if it's going to be like half a dozen or a dozen possibilities on that manual, and they're going to be different affixes, not the same affixes that you otherwise get. So special affixes, things like increased radius of skills, or chance to cast bonus projectiles. These tempering manuals drop from most content. You don't have to go target farm them. So tempering an item means taking one of those tempering manuals, and then it's going to randomly pull from the list of potential affixes in that manual. It's going to take one of those randomly and put it onto your item. Now, every item is going to have a certain amount of tempering potential, or they call it tempering durability, or they might change its name to tempering rolls. Basically, let's say you have a value of 4. That's how many rerolls you get to try to get the affix that you want. Different item bases can have different tempering recipes applied to them, with the amulet being that sort of free slot that can take any kind of tempering recipe apart from weapon. But otherwise, again, there's like offensive, there's defensive. When you will double temper an item, however, you cannot take 2 tempers from the same category. So you can't apply 2 defensive tempers. And again, a lot of these tempering affixes is not just it's not just make number bigger, right? It's not just more damage. It's not just presumably more, armor or what have you. It's more interesting ways to customize your character. Again, with stuff like bigger radius or more projectiles. You can temper rare items. You can temper legendary items. You cannot temper unique items, however. Now, I'll clarify, you can brick your item with tempering. You have that fixed number of rerolls. You don't get to select specifically which temper from the manual you get. So if you go through all your rerolls, you're down to 0 and you don't have the temper that you want, well, it is what it is. You got to get a new item and start over. I wonder if there's any wiggle room on that. I know that there's some mixed emotions there. Some people prefer a bit more determinism in their crafting. Some people don't like that feels bad moment of, oh, well, now the item is ruined. But it'll come out to how it works out in play. We'll see. The devs are always open to feedback. The next crafting system that we'll talk about in a little bit actually has a way for you to not brick your item and restart that upgrade process. So I wonder if that can actually be applied to tempering as well. But again, more on that in a bit. Because another addition is greater affixes. These only start appearing in the late game. And they're more powerful versions of regular affixes. They're going to roll at 1.5 times percent the base roll. So basically 50% higher than a max roll. These are super rare. You can have more than one of these rolls. It's exalted affixes, right? It's T6, T7 affixes. We've seen this in other games and Last Epoch and whatnot. Even the tempering system, right? It's very reminiscent of crafting, forging potential that we see in Last Epoch. These are good systems in Last Epoch, so hey, ought to be good in D4 too. And when items with greater affixes drop, you're going to see it on the drop right away that this is an item with a greater affix. So you don't have to, again, sift through a bunch of items looking for that greater affix. It's going to be clear as day on the drop. Now, how does this interact with the enchanting system? You cannot enchant into a greater affix. If you re-roll a greater affix, well, it's gone. It turns into a regular affix. Greater affixes will always be via drops. All right, the second crafting system that they're adding is a super late game crafting system. It's called Masterworking. Every item's going to have up to 12 Masterwork ranks. And this is going to be a lot more similar to the current upgrading crafting blacksmith option in D4, just heavily expanded upon. And not just in numbers. So most of the time that you Masterwork upgrade an item, it's going to get a small buff to all of its affixes. And this includes the tempered affixes. So I think it's like a 5% upgrade per rank, but on ranks, I think it's 4, 8, and 12, or there's 3 ranks spaced out throughout the masterworking process where instead of getting a 5% upgrade to all your affixes, you randomly get something like a 20% upgrade to a single affix. So what's the play here? Well, you're hoping that the most important affix on your item is going to get selected 3 times in a row to get absolute bonkers numbers, because this could also apply to unique items and uber uniques. These do get buffed. These do get influenced by masterworking. Uniques cannot be tempered, but they can be masterworked. Now, again, there's no determinism in here. It's all RNG. However, if you've gone to your 12 out of 12 ranks and you're not happy with your masterworked item, you can reset the masterwork, bring it back down to 0, remove all those upgrades. The item still exists. You know, whatever crafting materials you sunk into it to upgrade it, those are lost forever, but at least the item itself isn't ruined and you have to get an entirely new item base. So I like that part of it. I like that part of it. It's forgiving in that sense. And I do wonder if there will be feedback that'll steer them with regards to tempering to also have some kind of forgiving system to reset an item. Or if maybe in practice and in play, the community will be fine with that as it is. Again, we'll have 1 week of PTR testing during which they're going to want to hear all the feedback, and they're delaying the season so that they can actually work in the feedback that we give them. The devs also stressed that all these changes that they spoke about in the campfire chat, these will come at the start, launch day of Season 4, and everything is also coming to the Eternal Realm as well on the same day. So these aren't going to be weeks into the season. This is all day 1, and this is a core foundational rework of the game that is going to both Season and Eternal Realm. Oh, and just to clarify, with regards to the affix rework, they're not just removing affixes, right? They didn't just cut down all the extraneous affixes. They also added new affixes too, like fury per second or life per hit. These are new base affixes. Weapons can now have attack speed on them. They can have resource cost reduction on them. So that about covers the itemization changes. Huge amount of stuff here. Enormous win for the game. Again, we'll see. In theory, a lot of this stuff sounds really good. We'll see in practice. We'll get to test it out. But everything they say they're trying to achieve is all music to my ears. Itemization is arguably the most singular, important aspect of an ARPG, or a systems ARPG at least. Everything else kind of builds off of itemization. If you don't have good itemization, how could people like the game? So making items exciting, making items a fun system to engage with, reducing the tedium, focusing on the fun moments, focusing on player agency. I think these are all wonderful changes. Next, they covered class changes. We're going to hear more about those next week with the blog post, but overall, they are making significant updates to every class, not just tuning numbers. They're making meaningful class changes. One of their core philosophies throughout all the balance changes they're making is to open up design. So things that were very restrictive, things that were very like, this only applies to this, right? It's almost that extension of Damage on Tuesdays, where it's like, only against this type of enemies, or only this kind of skill benefits, or only this class can use this. They're removing a lot of these barriers to make things more applicable to a greater variety of skills and builds and playstyles and classes. For example, some effect that would only apply with core skills will now apply to all skills. We're getting a new Uber unique with Season 4, Tyrael's Might. They also said they're doubling the number of uniques, and this could be interpreted in one of 2 ways. Either they're doubling the number of uniques they normally add in a season, or they're doubling the number of uniques in the entire game. I'm not sure which it is. We'll find out next week, I suppose. And if Tyrael Might seems a little underwhelming, bear in mind that with the itemization rework, the affix rework, damage reduction is going to be a lot harder to come by as an affix. So it's going to be rarer, right? We're not going to be getting all those 80 sources of damage reduction versus close, damage reduction versus distant. So when you do get damage reduction somewhere, it'll be much more meaningful. Minions all around getting a lot more love. Minions will now inherit 100% of your base attributes. Used to be they only inherited some of them, and other attributes only apply to minions, and this and that. Well, now just all the buffs that you get, your minions also get. Just a nice raw increase in power to minions. We're going to see some nerfs to Thibaut's Will and the Banished Lord's Talisman. We're seeing nerfs to Barbarian, particularly Hoda and Charge, Unbridled Rage. Overall, these are good. They're not killing any of these things. They want to keep them strong and powerful, but they don't want Barb meta anymore. They don't want Barb to be the best thing at everything, destroying all competition. These are good balance changes, assuming they don't over-nerf and Barb is still powerful and effective as they intend. They teased a couple changes, like the Barbarian getting a Dust Devil build buff, Druid Lacerate base skill is getting a buff. And when I say buff here, we're not talking about just numbers tuned up, we're talking about changes to the behavior of these things. Sorceress Frozen Orb complete change. Now it's going to explode where you target with your mouse, as opposed to just detonating a fixed distance away. And there's a new unique for Sorceress that makes your Frozen Orb have a chance to spawn conjurations when it explodes. And then those conjurations have a chance to shoot Frozen Orbs. So we've basically introduced cast on cast. Seems like a really fun build. I always loved Frozen Orb back in the D2 days. I hope to see it become a powerful, viable build in D4. Rogue is getting an entire rework to Inner Sight to buff it. It's going to be easier to maintain Inner Sight, and you're also getting a 25% crit chance boost while Inner Sighted. Necromancer, huge Book of the Dead buffs. Again, much love to minions here for Necro. Cold Mages can now completely solve Vulnerable for Necromancer. Reapers can help with some massive cooldown reduction. The Golem, whenever you pop Golem, will make you and your Golem unstoppable. So it's another source of unstoppable for Necromancers. They're also making changes to pretty much all the flat damage aspects, right? This is always an issue where you have aspects that roll with like, okay, this does 4,000 to 5,000 damage or whatever. It rolls on some range, and then it's like, okay, I got this at level 20 or at level 60, and now at level 100, well, I gotta farm a better one because it just doesn't scale right. Now, all these flat damage aspects, or these previously flat damage aspects, are just gonna scale with your weapon damage. So just changing out your weapon is going to naturally scale up these flat damage aspects. In theory, I like what they tried to do with flat damage aspects, where in Diablo 2, right, your weapon for many builds didn't really matter with regards to damage. If you were a spellcaster, your skills determined your spell damage. In Diablo 3, you were your weapon. Take off your weapon, you do 0 damage. In D2, take off your weapon as a spellcaster, you still do whatever your fireball damage is. So I thought that with D4, they were trying to carry that forward with the flat damage aspects. Unfortunately, just did not pan out with the overall structure and systems of D4. So this is a positive change for this case. Then again, in general, on uniques and on aspects, they're focusing on opening up the design. So the Azarath, no longer Barbarian only. Removing restrictions everywhere. For hardcore players, hardcore is getting more hardcore than ever, as it should and ought to be. They're removing the elixir of death evasion. They're removing the cheat death passive on the flame shield for the sorcerer. Okay, on to the endgame changes now. The devs expressed that they do want us to get to level 100 faster, so they're expediting how fast we get there by ramping up the amount of XP. Bonuses that we get: World Tier 2 bonus XP went from 20% to 50%. World Tier 3 went from 100% to 150. World Tier 4 from 200 to 250. The most significant change there really is the World Tier 2 one. It's going to really help speed up early game leveling. Also, huge change. Helltide now starts appearing as of World Tier 1. Massive, huge sweeping changes to Helltide. Greater density in Helltide. They were talking about how they saw Bloodtide in Season 2 and how well received that was, and even the Outer World events in Season 3, the Robotide stuff, and they introduced elements of that now into just base Helltide. So in Helltide, as you're going around doing whatever, killing demons, you're picking up your MacGuffins, right? You are building up threat level. Like it's GTA and you're getting stars and the police are coming after you. And the more your threat level increases, the more aggro you pull onto yourself. More monsters are going to spawn to come and attack you, so you're getting more monster density. And once you fill up your aggro bar, there's some ominous hell siren, and then the new version of a Bloodseeker is going to spawn and attack you. It's called a Hellborn. It's a new monster type with a new model, but it's basically the equivalent of what a Bloodseeker was in Bloodtide. And these guys can also drop summoning materials for Lord Zir, the Uber boss. Treasure goblins now also have a chance to drop Uber materials. Basically, in general, Uber boss materials now can drop randomly from a bunch of different things. Even elites, we were talking about the elite jackpot. Elites have a chance of dropping Uber materials overall. Just a huge win over here, where through natural play, you can now start to accrue these Uber materials instead of have to just always target farm the same thing over and over and over. And on the topic of those Ubers, we got a new Uber boss. We now have the twin of Uber Duriel. We have Uber Andariel added. And she's coming in with new mechanics. It's not going to be the same Andariel fight from the campaign. We see she has Poison Nova now. She's going to have the same drop table as Uber Duriel, so now it's going to be your choice. Running Uber Andariel, Uber Duriel for the same kinds of drops. And we learned this after the campfire chat that now actually all the Uber bosses, even outside of Duriel and Andariel, have a tiny chance of also dropping Uber uniques. So Uber uniques will not be locked to just Andariel and just Duriel. They're just the most reasonable way to farm them. But there's more. They're going to be making Uber bosses. They're going to be level 200 Uber bosses. They're going to have even higher chances of dropping Ubers. And how you interact with that is going to be via a new system, a new endgame system called the Pit. What is the Pit? Greater Rifts from Diablo 3. Once you've done a Nightmare Dungeon tier 45, that is level 100 monsters, you're going to start having the possibility of getting drops that are basically GR keys. It's going to be called a Rune Shard, and you're going to use these to open up portals to the Pit. And the Pit is a randomized dungeon. It's not a Nightmare Dungeon, it's just a randomized map tile set, and you're going to have 10 minutes to kill enough enemies to then open up a portal to a boss fight. And unlike regular dungeons, you don't have to full clear anything. There's no other objectives. You're really just, it's a greater riff from Diablo 3. You run around killing monsters. You want to be time efficient, and you'll find portals that'll take you to another level, deeper down, if you want to say. You don't have to kill all the monsters on a certain level. And once you've filled your progress bar, a portal opens to the boss fight. And there are different tiers of Pit in the same way that there were different GR levels. So it keeps getting more and more challenging. Starts off at level 100, but you can go all the way to, fighting monsters of over level 200 with these. You don't get Nightmare Dungeon affixes in these Pit levels either. Every time you die, you're penalized 30 seconds, and if you don't complete the rift within the timer, well, you don't get ejected. You get to finish it if you want, but you're not going to get the masterworking crafting components. So the Pit is going to be your main source / only source, I'm not sure, of masterworking components. Well, let's say main source. So you get other stuff, right? You get XP, you get drops, but this is where you're going to want to farm your masterworking components. And if you don't do it in time, no masterworking components. Now, another thing that increases difficulty as you go deeper and deeper is that in the Pit, during boss fights, and I think as well just while you're playing, you can momentarily face shades of bosses. So a boss like a Shade of Lilith or a Shade of Elias will appear and just do a quick attack. And it's not something that you're supposed to fight. It's just like, oh, this is a new mechanic that I have to dodge on a temporary basis. So I think it's meant to kind of break up the monotony of, especially of those boss fights. Can tend to get a little, they sort of end up being like the most boring part of a Nightmare Dungeon. So now, instead of just fighting that one, Tomb Lord, you're fighting Tomb Lord, and then boom, oh, Lilith suddenly appears with her devastating waves. There are added complications that become increasingly likely the deeper into the Pit you go. Now, it sounds like there's going to be different tiers of masterworking materials, and the deeper you go, the better masterworking materials you get. So you will be incentivized to actually farm at a difficulty that is challenging you. You're not going to just want to farm tier 1 over and over, because you're just not going to be getting all the masterworking materials that would really benefit you. So you do want to push yourself, but it doesn't sound like you want to be slamming your head against the wall. So I do imagine we're going to end up in some kind of like Nightmare Dungeon 90 run. That's going to be, the community will figure out what the optimal tier of Pit to do over and over. Then it's a little unclear, but I think in the Pit you're also going to get these Stygian stones, which is this, it's what you use to summon the Uber bosses, the level 200 Ubers. So overall, it feels like the Pit is the new endgame funnel. Now, this is a win for a good number of people. I know a lot of people, D3 players in particular, wanted to see GRs added into D4. I think this is a nice introductory implementation. It's not a revolutionary system. Again, it's mostly just GRs from D3, but it's something that can always be expanded upon in the future. We saw, again, with the introduction of the Gauntlet, the introduction of a Trials section in D4, where the Gauntlet leaderboard is just one thing under Trials. Maybe we could also get another leaderboard under Trials for the Pit, to see who has delved deepest into the Pit. There's a lot of opportunities here for more that can be expanded upon. Again, we're not seeing a whole lot of like new endgame stuff added, but it's foundational elements being added in that is paving the way for more stuff to be built on now. Obviously, we would have all hoped that D4 would have launched in a state where the foundation was all solid and we could just be working on adding more things. You know, we're 8 months into the launch of the game. We're still reworking foundational systems, but once that foundation is then going to be nice and set, then add all the systems, all the content. So that covers everything they presented. Then in the Q&A, we learned a couple extra things. First off, all the items that you currently have, when this new patch comes out, all your items will become legacy items. They won't be deleted, they won't be re-rolled, they will not change in any way, but you will not be able to engage with the new crafting systems, tempering and masterworking. Therefore, you will obviously won't be able to bring any of them into a new season, though will stay on the Eternal Realm. Maybe some odd combination of items might become best in slot for Eternal Realm, but for the most part, we don't really care too much about what happens there. But yes, that Shaco that you worked so hard for, yes, you will get to keep that. And just to clarify, everything that we discussed, this is not the season theme. This is just base content permanently added into the game, Eternal Realm forever going forward. The season theme they didn't even want to reveal yet. We're going to learn more about that in the future. Now, another thing that they just casually dropped at the end in the Q&A, because people were noticing, hey, does it look like the camera's more zoomed out? Yes, you can now zoom out the camera. I am mind blown by this. I really thought this would never happen, and I think this might be the first thing that we see in Diablo 4 that is a sign of Bobby Kotick being gone. Call me crazy, but I believe that the camera being zoomed in was so that we can see the cosmetics on our characters more, and our cosmetics and other players' cosmetics, and therefore increase sales of cosmetics. And now, zoomed out more, we don't see those as well. We're less incentivized to spend money. And again, my conspiracy theory is that it was orders from on high, all the way from Bobby Kotick. And now that he's gone and Microsoft has taken over, they're like, okay, give him the zoom out. And I would look to what's going to happen in the D4 shop coming forward as well in coming seasons, and observe if any changes happen there that become more consumer friendly. Now, on the topic of loadouts, right, the Armory D3, once again, they say that's something that they want to do, nothing to announce just yet. On the topic of the loot filter, though, they basically said with all the changes to itemization, they don't feel that a loot filter is necessary. And I know a lot of people say this is an L, this is a big loss, they still want a loot filter. Myself personally, I don't believe that a loot filter is necessary in all ARPGs, in all games. I think it comes down to where you are solving the issue. And like, I think we can all agree that in theory, if you got in a game 1 drop per hour, you don't need a loot filter, right? Picking up 1 thing every hour, you know, you don't need to be filtering out those drops. Of course, we're not getting 1 drop per hour, but we're just agreeing that there is a case where you would not need a loot filter. So in practice, in play, we will see on PTR whether we still need a loot filter or we don't. I suspect we probably still will. I agree that in current D4, we absolutely need one. And if the D4 meta becomes grinding pit level 200, and what we learned was that the deeper you go into the pits, you're getting more legendary drops, we might reach a point again where it's like GR, 90 spam in D3 and it's raining legendaries. And if that's the case, yeah, we will probably want a loot filter. But before we demand one, let's just play the game and see if we still feel we need one. Oh, they also clarified that the Codex of Power is not going to be on a per character basis. So when you start a new season and you're playing softcore, all of your softcore seasonal characters will share the same codex. The same thing, it's split softcore, hardcore, season, non-season. This actually is very helpful towards leveling up alts. And yeah, that about covers things. This was a big video, but this was a big campfire chat. Lots of W's, a couple question marks, maybe an L here or there, depending on your preferences. But overall, it sounds like they have brought the core foundation of itemization, in theory, into a much better place. And they're still open to changes and feedback. That's why they want to have this PTR April 2nd to 9th. This is the biggest, most significant change that I've been waiting for with the itemization rework. Still more work to do on Endgame. I do agree we need more Endgame. But again, I think the sheer scope of the changes here, these devs haven't been just twiddling their thumbs. They are working on things. So if this is what we get here, when it comes to the game being in a good baseline state and then they can just focus on slamming in more endgame content, I think we're approaching a very good base to build off of here. But that's how I feel. I'm obviously very excited about a lot of these changes, excited about diving into them. I think D4 has become a much more fun game to play. We've removed a lot of the pain points. We've introduced more excitement, all revolving around that itemization. I think leveling up a character 1 to 50 is going to be more fun. 50 to 100 is going to be more fun. More systems to engage with. I'm skeptical of a couple of things, but we'll see. We'll try them out. We'll give feedback. But what do you folks think? Sound off in the comments. Because that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Special thanks to my supporters for making these videos possible. And subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.